Hey Tony, it's Friday, and first off, to answer your question of the week, I haven't actually watched Umbrella Academy. Taylor has. Taylor really enjoys it, and she's read the graphic novel, so she can. If you want to have any good discussions on it, Taylor's the one to talk to.
So you asked what the opinions were. One, it improves upon the graphic novels because the graphic novels have a pretty decent setup, but it takes a lot of the concepts and makes them better. Treats a lot of the characters better and adds more diversity overall, which I think is a good thing for the show. But two, overall, I like it. It's, pretty equal to what we had initially with the story that Gerard wrote. There you go.
And yes, Tony, it's Gerard Way. It was the lead singer of My Chemical Romance and the person who wrote Umbrella Academy. Just so you know, because you really couldn't remember it, I was a little embarrassed to be your older brother. Just a little bit embarrassed, though. Alright, so this video is going to be a long one because there's a lot to talk about, because I want to talk about the election. Now, just to make it more simple in format, I'm going to separate into three different parts. Part one is going to be some of my thoughts around the general election, the lead up to it, and the actual voting process. Part two is going to be some of the aftermath and fallout from the election. And part three is going to be some of my thoughts for the future. And that's going to be a big part of this because this was a really big election. Just no other way to say it, this was a huge election. So, without any further ado, let's start with the actual election itself. And I'm going to kind of separate into two subparts. What the election was and what the election was not. I'm going to be a little conceptual on this because we know what happened, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper into why it happened this way, and again, what the election was and what the election was not. So first off, what the election was not was a referendum on Trumpism as a whole. Now, it was certainly a referendum on Donald Trump, but I don't know if Trumpism can be separate from Donald Trump, but I have some thoughts that it will be separate, and I'll get to that a little more at the end of this video, in part three rather. What the election was really a victory for democracy. And I don't mean for whoever won. What I mean is this was an incredibly trying election. This was an election during some of the greatest racial protests we've seen since the 60s, during a pandemic, during a era of hyperpolarization between people. So it was a victory for democracy because it happened. And that's one really awesome thing anyway, is the fact the election happened. It was a victory insofar as there's been no voter fraud found. The mail-in ballots worked as well as they could have with everything factored in. And furthermore, this was cybersecurity experts have said this was the most secure election in American history, which is something we all should celebrate. It was definitely, at least in my area of the country, in New England, it was a real celebration of democracy. And again, I'll discuss some of the things that happened when the results came in during part two of this. But what else the election was it was kind of a continuation of 2016 in a lot of ways. Insofar as, obviously, Donald Trump didn't win the election this time because of our electoral college, but Donald Trump still carried the majority of the states he carried last time. There was a lot of the Senate and House turned into be a pretty closely contested race. The Democrats are looking like they're going to keep their majority in the House, which is good for the Democrats. But the Senate is kind of a toss-up. There's going to be a runoff election in Georgia in a couple weeks, in which, if the Democrats can win both those those races, then the Democrats have the majority in the House, Senate, and will have the presidency, assuming nothing happens during some of these election lawsuits. And I don't think it will, but again, I'll kind of touch on that a little bit later. What the election, again, was not the blue wave that people were expecting. It was, pollsters had really thought that the Democrats were going to carry the Electoral College more so than they did. They thought they were going to gain more seats in the House, and they thought they were going to wrest control from the Senate. That didn't happen, as we can very well see. The Democrats lost 5 seats in the House. Currently, I know this is a little bit up to change still, but it was not the blue wave that was expected. It is going to be an interesting couple years because 2022 is when there's going to be a real big. The Senate race is going to be huge in 2022. The House race is going to be the House race, but the Senate race is huge in 2022 because there are a lot of seats that are going to be up to grabs for the Democrats or for the Republicans. Because there were a lot of Republicans who won in 2016, and if I'm doing math right, 2016 plus 6 term in the Senate is 2022. Tell me if I'm doing my math wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm not.
You're doing math right.
Thank you.
But you did not go to school for mathing.
I did not go to school for mathing. That is true. So another thing I want to talk about is polling, which kind of leads into how there was expected to be this massive blue wave that didn't happen. So the pollsters were well known to be completely wrong in 2016. And they had refined a lot of their mechanics. They refined a lot of their formulas to what they thought was going to be far more accurate in 2020. And they were, but they weren't. They correctly determined who won the election, which was Joe Biden. Again, unless things change, which they won't, more likely than not. But they were very wrong on the percentage that they thought Joe Biden was going to win over Donald Trump. And this was really the Democrats' election to lose. This was Joe Biden's election to lose. You had a deeply unpopular president who has poorly handled 2 of the greatest crises of modern years. And so with the COVID, which is really the COVID and the economic downturn from COVID, which is really going to be one of the defining features of people you and I's age, and also who had mishandled many of the protests throughout the country. You can talk about how there's many things you know about how he would constantly tweet at things like that towards the protesters, say that celebrate people who went and fought them, et cetera, tell the police that they should be more violent than they are. So this was really the Democrats' election to lose. And Joe Biden was not a particularly popular candidate. I'm pretty sure he did win the Democratic primary, but at least in many of the circles I travel in, he was not the one that anybody wanted. In fact, it's a post that you've probably seen 1,000,001 times of Joe Biden was not my first choice, nor is he my 15th, but he will be my choice in November. And that was certainly what happened in the end, is Joe Biden won with over 4.5 more million votes than Donald Trump in the popular vote. And the Electoral College, I think he ended up pulling out
305 and 236 are in the final count.
Thank you, Justice. Justice said 305 and 236?
236.
And 236 were the final counts, which I was certainly expecting more of an electoral. The popular vote turned out about where I expected it to be, but I expected more in the Electoral College. I expected the Electoral College to be a little less fraught because of all the issues that Donald Trump was dealing, particularly in the last year or two of his presidency. And particularly the last year when you had almost war with Iran, you had an impeachment. In fact, there's an entire video of things that happened in 2020 that's going to be a long video as well, because 2020's been a year. But one thing that I really feel about the pollsters is they underrepresented Donald Trump, mostly because I think there was a very large silent Trump bump that occurred during the election. The reason why I say that is it's pretty obvious that Donald Trump is arguably the least popular president in modern history. In fact, the votes pretty much prove that, considering he lost the popular vote in 2016 by 3 million votes, and in 2020 by, I think the total right now is 4.5 million. It's expected it could be as high as 5 million. That's a huge margin of a president in our divided country missing, not getting, losing by that many votes. That's pretty substantial. And but I really feel that there was a large silent Trump bump because with the way Donald Trump is, not only is he unpopular, a lot of times, even by like many moderates, if you mention that you're a Trump person or you're voting for Trump, you would get looked down on and judged. And I really feel that when the pollsters were asking, are you planning on voting for Donald Trump? People were embarrassed to say it out loud they were voting for Donald Trump because of the multitude of issues he's had throughout his presidency, ranging from all of his interactions with like some of his foreign diplomacy, some of his diplomatic actions, some of his internal actions, and how he really divided the country into red states and blue states. So that was some of my thoughts on the election itself. It took a really long time. I knew it was going to be a really long election because it was going to take a long time to get a lot of those votes in. But I feel like I undervalued how long it was going to be. I really underestimated it because I was like, okay, it's gonna take a few weeks to get the votes, of course, but I felt that it wasn't going to be 6 days of me constantly checking my phone for election results. Because that's really what it felt like. It wasn't 6, I think it was like 5 days, but still, it was me constantly checking my phone of, okay, what's the latest result? What's the latest result? What's the latest result? And I underestimated how long that was going to take. So I don't think it was not a win for the Democrats, but it wasn't a loss either. We're kind of in a bit of a status quo of pre-2016, except particularly on the right, there's going to be a real vocal sect of them that are convinced that the election was stolen, are convinced that Donald Trump should have won, and are convinced that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to destroy the country, and it's going to be up to Trump or a Trump-like figure to come up and solve everything. So that was part one of some of my thoughts on the general election. Part two is going to be a little bit shorter, I think, but it's also going to be a little more interesting. So I'm going to start on Saturday when the election results ended up coming in which Joe Biden became the projected winner. We were actually we were on our way to go hiking that day, just a nice little trail close to us. And it was a pretty remarkable moment. So my city, Northampton, has been, for lack of a better term, under siege by a lot of Trump supporters and a lot of Proud Boys. A lot of white nationalist groups have really been attacking Northampton at its core. They would always have large rallies. There were events of violence that broke out, and they even posted on their social medias that they were doing these primarily to get liberals arrested, which there's a whole lot to talk about on that, because that, at its very definition, is terrorism. Trying to do these actions to support a cause to support your cause, and making violent actions to get liberals arrested, to put the city in fear. And they post this on their social media all the time. And that was Saturday when the results came in. It was emotional in so many ways. We were on our way when we got the results, and you heard people, even when the moment the results came out, just celebrating. We drove around town a few times, honking our horn, blasting Hamilton up there, particularly Battle of Yorktown. All the shouting, "We won!" right in that big part there, and the city was so alive. Now, obviously, the city is a cultural center of Western Massachusetts, but it's certainly been impacted by COVID, as everything else has, and it's certainly been impacted by these rallies, like many other places have. And the fact that we were able to just drive around, and I posted it on Facebook because it was the best way I could describe it. The streets of Northampton were alive with the sounds of freedom. People were celebrating. There were dances in the streets. We drove around a few times because it was just taking in the moment. Now, 2020 has been a very difficult year. There's no denying that. And the way Taylor said, and I think is also a great way to say it, is if you ask her when the very first time she felt alive in 2020 was, it was Saturday, November 7th, when the election results came in. And it was... I have problems describing how it felt because it was relief. It was celebration. It was believing in the democratic process. And that was something I had certainly been having issues with for years now, especially since like the 2016 election started in full earnest in 2015. It was like end of 2015, beginning of 2016. I hadn't felt that alive and free since quite probably when Obama was elected in 2008. And it was just incredible. We ended up, we went to the celebration. We were there for probably an hour or two. And just the entire city was alive. I took a little video that I'll have to show you next time I'm home of just the celebration. And there were people like dancing. There were drummers all over the place. People had all sorts of American flags and pride flags and every single flag you can imagine, all waving in celebration. And it was incredible, truly incredible. And it's a memory that I know I'm going to hold on to for a very long time. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the aftermath and some of the fallout of the election itself. Now, to the surprise of absolutely no one who's followed this election, Donald Trump did not take his election loss sitting down. He has been filing countless lawsuits in countless jurisdictions, trying to do whatever he can to get the election results reversed or get certain ballots thrown out. And quite frankly, I don't think those suits are gonna really do a whole lot. If you get the chance, there's a really great YouTube channel called Legal Eagle. He did an entire discussion on a lot of these suits and whether or not he thinks they're going to go forward or how far they're going to go. And it's well worth a watch. I heavily recommend it. But his opinion is the same opinion as my opinion as well, is that the election results are not close enough that any of these suits are going to mean anything. Now, I'm absolutely glad that so many states are doing recounts. You absolutely should do recounts because the integrity of our process is what makes democracy work. And if there's ever any doubt, you should do a recount. And I am really glad we're doing these. I don't think the recount's going to change anything because it's not a 2000 Gore v. Bush Florida case. It's the only state that could potentially be a state that could flip. I guess there are two states. Nevada could absolutely flip because it was really close. And Pennsylvania is going to be where a lot of these cases are going to take place in because Pennsylvania was really what won Biden the election towards the end.
Georgia today, officially.
Yeah, Georgia finished their recount today and confirmed for Biden.
Confirmed blue.
Wonderful. So Georgia was doing a recount and the results remain the same. And I think that's going to be how it's going to be overall. I don't think the election suits, I don't think the recounts are going to change anything. Which
Georgia tossed out all the lawsuits.
Oh, cool. Justice has obviously been more in touch with the news today than I have been.
I have election as a notification thing.
Oh, okay. I was too busy at work. I didn't get a chance to really read any news today because today was a busy day. But it's especially with those results, Biden's going to be our next president. Yeah, which is exactly as I assumed it would be after he was the projected winner. I didn't think any of these suits or any of these recounts were going to change anything, and lo and behold, it really looks like they're not going to. Which is again good. It's a win for democracy. We did our recount, and it proved that the first time was correct, and that's a win. Again, it lets us trust the integrity of our system. But I know my opinion is not necessarily the opinion that President Trump and his supporters share. They are convinced that the election was stolen from them, and Donald Trump has even come out and say that he's not going to concede. He's going to stay in power for as long as he can. And that is incredibly unsurprising. I knew he was not going to take any loss he might have had. He was going to claim fraud. He was going to claim that it's the deep state working against him, claim the Democrats were the ones who fixed all the ballots, in which it's all absurd. First off, Democrats are not organized enough to make this massive undertaking. And the Democrats also wouldn't have had them lose several House seats and have it go to a razor-thin margin in the Senate if they were really fixing the election.
The ongoing statement, hand to God, Mitch McConnell would not be in office.
If you couldn't hear Taylor, the ongoing statement is, hand to God, if the Democrats were really fixing the election, Mitch McConnell would not have won his race. And that's just, it's funny, but it's also absolutely true. If the Democrats were really trying to fix this, they did a really poor job, and it would have been revealed almost immediately because someone would have found out, someone would have whistleblown. It's why conspiracies are ridiculous, because it requires so many people to take this vow of silence that it's just statistically improbable. But it's going to be a long couple months. That's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Donald Trump's going to do whatever he can to stay in power. And there's certain concerns that as soon as he steps down, of what it could mean for some of his supporters. There's some belief that Donald Trump's going to try running again in 2024, which I find unlikely. I think he might try, but at that point he'll be nearing 80. Assume that all of his potential legal battles, he gets out of them scot-free, or he gets like pardoned or something by a Biden or by Mike Pence. And the rumors he's going to run in 2024, I don't think so. And this is going to lead me into part 3 of this video. So part 3 is some of my thoughts for the future. So some of my thoughts for the future are going to be really broad and conceptual because we don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know what type of president Joe Biden's going to be. We don't know what type of vice president Kamala Harris is going to be. We don't know if Joe Biden's going to run in 2024 or if it's going to be Kamala Harris running as his heir apparent. I personally tend to lean more on, I think Joe Biden's only going to have this one term. I think he's going to step down to put Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg or one of these young Democrats to kind of step up, because they had a lot of support, and it's going to be some seasoning for the future of the party. It's my belief, and it's also my hope, is that Joe Biden's going to use his 4 years to stabilize, and then put the Democratic Party in the future of it. The people like a Joe Kennedy, a Kamala Harris, a Pete Buttigieg, or Beto O'Rourke, all of those names of like the younger Democrats that really stepped up in this election, the AOCs. I think that's going to be the future of it. That being said, I certainly have a lot of concerns on Trumpism as a whole. So I honestly think that Trumpism will be separate from Donald Trump, because Trumpism at its very core is just conservative white nationalism. And that's not really, I think it's not new. It's absolutely not new. We've been doing this for the entire lifespan of our country, of nationalistic white, conservative white nationalists. Sorry, I tripped over my words a little bit there. And that's not new, nor is it unfortunately going to go away anytime soon. But my real concern for the future is, what if our next Trump is someone who's, quite frankly, more competent? I have told many friends and colleagues that I thank our lucky stars that Donald Trump was incompetent, because he did a lot of damage to America, to our democracy as a whole. In fact, we can see this right now with him contesting the election results. That's one of the bedrocks of our country, is peaceful transfer of power and acceptance of the democratic process. And when you have conservative allies of President Trump come out and say democracy is not the objective, security is the objective, that's horrifying, because that's an opinion that's going to be really popular amongst the shrinking white majority. Now, last I checked, I want to say it's estimated that in 2050, America's going to be a majority minority country. And I'm here for that. I love that. I'm super excited, because white men have controlled the country for far too long and have done a lot of damage to America as a whole. And I am absolutely for broadening our horizons. It's part of the reason why I really align with the Democratic Party, is they are a diverse cultural party that has people from all walks of life, ranging from your college-educated elite professionals, such as myself, meaning like lawyers are considered to be like coastal elites, things like that, to a lot of your a lot of your minority populations. In fact, one thing that really won Arizona for Joe Biden was the Native American population there. They were a huge voting bloc that really flipped Arizona blue. And that's awesome because it's allowing more people to get involved in something they traditionally haven't been involved in. And it makes me hopeful for the future because there is this multicultural, multi-ethnic collective that's forming, and I think that's a good way forward. But in that same regard, it's going to lead to a lot more militant white nationalists, people who understandably are concerned about where their place will be in this new diverse America, because you look at it historically, your white men have discriminated, have done unspeakable things to so many population groups. And I can understand someone being concerned that the moment they become a minority, the same thing's going to happen to them. And like, I don't find that concern valid, but I understand the thought process to get there, even if I disagree with it. And it makes me worried that our next Donald Trump is going to be a young firebrand conservative who will stoke that same white resentment that Donald Trump did, be able to form a ethnic nationalist group to really support him. Like one of Trump's big pickups from the Democratic Party were a lot of blue collar workers. Blue collar workers have traditionally voted Democrat because Democrats traditionally, at least in the past 60 years or so, have really been big on union rights, whereas conservatives really haven't been. And Donald Trump came in, made them worried about their place in the world, and they went with the person who they thought was there for them. Now, obviously, the past 4 years have shown that that's just not the case. Things have not miraculously gotten better for your working class and your middle class. In fact, they've gotten progressively worse. But I can understand the viewpoint insofar as this was someone who really spoke to a lot of those white former blue collar workers, and it worries me that we'll have someone like a Stephen Miller, who was one of Trump's top advisors, who was, by all intents and purposes, a ultra-nationalist conservative, and who a lot of Trump's policies that were particularly damaging to minority groups were started with Miller. Oh, sorry, it's Stephen Miller, not Richard Miller. I mixed up, but Stephen Miller. And that's something we have to worry about. We have to worry about the next Trump coming in as a young firebrand conservative who will stoke that same resentment, but will be more competent about it, will do a lot of damage, will kind of step in through a lot of the cracks that the Trump administration formed and do catastrophic damage to not only our way of life, but our democracy as a whole. And that's a really real concern I have. I picked up a good book recently called it's all about fascism and how to kind of point it out, and it's all about the us and them of fascist discussions. You see what Adolf Hitler did in Germany, you see what Benito Mussolini did in Italy, and other fascist leaders throughout history have created the same us versus them narrative and have used it to do catastrophic damage. Now, I have faith in our institutions. We survived the Trump presidency. Not fully intact, but I feel mostly intact. And I can only hope that the next time we face an existential threat to our democracy, people really try and maintain our American cultures, our American democracy, and our American institutions. We're not perfect. We are not by any stretch of the imagination perfect. But I have hopes that we can make steps to become a better nation, a better republic, a better democracy. So, Tony, my question for you is, what do you think the future holds? I know it's a big question, but this was a long video. So, Tony, I'll see you on Monday. Later, bro.